This webinar is part of a series that reflects between Noni Lasso and Emily Phillips Galloway from Harvard and Vanderbilt University, respectively, and the New York State Education Department. In this webinar, the second of a two-part webinar, I revisit and further unpack the hallmarks of advanced literacies, which are fundamental to work that leaders and their teams in school districts serving our increasingly linguistically and culturally diverse learner population. For those of you who might be new to this topic, additional information can be found through the New York State Education Department website, the website of the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages, and the regional bilingual education resource networks. We conclude this webinar by providing links to additional resources. As you will recall from the first webinar on this topic, advanced literacies refer to a set of skills that support oral and written communication for a range of purposes with an ever-widening audience. These skills and competencies have become increasingly essential in today's classrooms and workplaces, where we are working collaboratively and in teams more than ever, attempting to solve problems instead of just acquiring information and then communicating our thinking to others. Advanced literacies are critical also to civic and social participation. But how do we develop these skills and competencies among all students? In Webinar 1, I discuss reading and writing practices that build language and knowledge as the first two elements of high-quality learning that we attend to in curriculum and instruction. Here, I examine two additional hallmarks. Hallmark 2 focuses on the use of rich discussion, and Hallmark 4 focuses on the teaching of a small set of high-utility vocabulary, each in service of developing language and content knowledge and supporting students' participation in the classroom learning environment. As a reminder, the hallmarks are interconnected instructional elements. The study of high-utility vocabulary and language allows for students to fully participate in classrooms as readers, writers, and as students developing content area expertise. Beyond the four hallmarks, there is a fifth, important element to this instructional model: the use of school-wide protocols that support students to engage in this learning. Let's now think a bit about the second hallmark, which is the use of rich discussion to build language and knowledge. This instruction is a departure from business as usual. We know that school classrooms are often places dominated by teacher talk and require only brief and factual responses from students. What's the typical situation? A teacher asks a question that only requires a brief response by the student. The teacher then follows with an evaluation of the response, e.g., whether it's correct or incorrect, and the interaction is complete. This exchange is not sufficient to promote growth in students' language and cognitive skills, as well as their content knowledge. We need a much more intentional approach. Language development only really takes shape if there is an extended back-and-forth process of classroom interactions among youth and their peers, organized around rich content and topics. Beyond the cognitive and linguistic benefits, it's also the case that talk and discussion creates a more engaging, child- and youth-friendly learning environment. Not only do students need to work on their language skills for academic success, we also know that the way this instruction happens effectively is great for child and youth development. Specifically, recent research shows that fostering readers' engagement by focusing on building their autonomy and collaboration as learners produces greater gains in achievement. Talk-based learning tasks and projects are a great way to promote both autonomy by virtue of building in choice, different roles, and collaboration. Because discussions that are text-based often center on negotiating the text's meaning, students are able to productively struggle in a context that is supported by peers and teachers. When we talk about discussion to build language and knowledge, we can imagine it happening in a cycle that looks like this. We read a high-quality text, we discuss it, we write about the high-quality text, we talk about what we've written, and we engage in additional reading on that topic. An iterative cycle like this allows students to both engage in, talk to process what they read, and to enrich their writing as well as to support them as a pre-reading activity, to consolidate learnings from prior readings. Of course, this cycle can begin at any point among a community of learners. Discussion may precede or follow reading or writing. What would this look like in classrooms? We would expect to see that students are engaged in talk, including text-based talk, with a clear and specific purpose. So, whether it's to answer a text-based question or to take your perspective on an issue, we also would expect to see some sort of structure in place. Whether it's a small group discussion or think pair, share these structures help students know how to engage in what is a cognitively challenging task. Students should be encouraged to adopt language from the text that they're working with, to present their ideas and perspectives, as well as to adopt language from the teacher and from peers in the classroom. If we imagine creating a high-quality language environment, we would expect here much of the language and text echoed in the conversations that students are having about a topic. In curriculum, discussions may or may not be built into the daily teaching cycle. Ideally, though, teachers are provided in curriculum with formats for supporting talk, questions that prompt student engagement and participation with discussions, and guidance for educators in leading these high-impact conversations. So, that's Hallmark 2, focused on talk and discussion. Let's now turn to Hallmark 4, which is the study of a small set of high-utility vocabulary words. Those words that are most central for mastering language and content. Academic vocabulary, the specialized and sophisticated language of text, is a particular source of reading comprehension difficulty for many students, including multilingual learners and English language learners. But it's not really a reading problem. After all, many students, particularly as they enter into the upper elementary and middle school years, have good foundational skills for word reading, but tend to be word callers, students who read print, some fluently, without understanding deeply what they read. For this reason, we need to support students to learn and how to think about language and how words work. After all, students need to acquire thousands of words, more than 50,000, to navigate the language of the curriculum and comprehend text. Because of all the words our students, including ELLs, need to learn to be academically successful, it's tempting to try to teach as many as possible in the shortest amount of time needed. This reasoning makes sense on its face, but it comes at a great cost. When we go for breadth over depth, we are committing the error of coverage. Our students learn just a little about many words, often high-frequency or rare ones, but not enough to use them independently in their speech or writing, and they don't learn how words work. In that sense, this is really lost instructional time. The students are not much farther ahead. Instead, because we can't possibly cover and teach all of the words that students need to learn, but we can choose a small set of high-utility academic words students will definitely need, and then use those as a platform for teaching word learning, increasing academic talk, and promoting more strategic reading. The deep learning process is key, and it takes time. Mastering the complex ideas that are part of teaching that builds knowledge begins by recognizing that complex ideas are often conveyed using complex language. For that reason, giving access to the language of text demands that we attend to the teaching of the academic words, and therefore concepts needed to express the core ideas and knowledge in any unit. As we discuss vocabulary teaching, it is essential that we recognize that word knowledge is not all or nothing. There are actually many levels of word knowledge, as shown here. Subsequent exposures, we might have a narrow context-bound knowledge of that word. For example, the word segregation we believe refers only to segregation that occurs in school settings, because that's the only context. We've seen that word. And eventually, through subsequent exposures, we gain enough knowledge to understand a word, but perhaps not to recall it or to use it appropriately, and independently in our own speaking and writing. And finally, when we truly have mastery of a word, we can use it in our own reading and writing. We know its relationship with other words, And we can use it metaphorically when we're looking to assess if students have mastered the words that we've taught. We're really hoping to see it in their speech and their writing, which are the true distal transfer tasks. Turning to instruction that is aligned with Hallmark 4, we would expect to see that students are studying maybe 5 to 7 words across a unit and across a series of texts. Often these words include a range of content area words, words like segregation that refer to large concepts, as well as words that are necessary for expressing academic knowledge across content areas, in writing and in speech. Words like however and therefore. It is the case that are used when reading and writing to string together ideas and topics, and so, therefore, fundamental for young readers and writers to master. And the reason we focus on a core set of words instead of, say, learning 5 to 10 unique words a day is because to truly master a word, we know that students need extended exposure, and again, students are encouraged to use this language when speaking and writing. Finally, as we think about the specific hallmarks in action, especially hallmarks 2 and 4, we think of the use of school-wide protocols as a through line that knits together the 4 hallmarks of advanced literacy instruction. Discussion and learning protocols facilitate student engagement in effective discussion, especially in peer-to-peer discussions where structures and supports are necessary to really provide learners with a way to engage in what can be a very complex cognitive task. Protocols essentially provide routines and manners of engagement that allow participants to focus on content. For example, many schools we've worked with have adopted accountable talk as a paradigm for discussion. What accountable talk essentially does is provide students with a set framework and a series of moves to engage in around discussion, as well as an understanding of how the discussion is conducted. When all students are aware of this, discussions flow more smoothly. And because students are not concerned with how to engage in the discussion itself, they can divert cognitive resources to focus instead on learning from the discussion and mastering the content that is being discussed. Like any protocol, accountable talk gives students ways of learning with peers and scaffolding them into rich, engaging content. That is the reason that we focus so heavily on the use of protocols to support advanced literacy instruction. There are a number of protocols available for free on the internet through the National School Reform Faculty website. But of course, they also are built into curriculum and interventions. And it's important to be sure they are implemented as part of the teaching toolkit. The hallmarks are designed to provide the necessary instructional roadmap to teaching the reading, writing, and speaking skills needed for communicating, understanding, and accessing knowledge in classroom, academic, and workplace settings. In schools that have successfully adopted this cohesive approach to advanced literacies instruction, leaders can anticipate both short-term and long-term outcomes. In the short term, implementing the hallmarks often begins for schools with the selection and implementation of school-wide instructional practices and routines for implementation. In the long term, schools that implement the hallmarks in curriculum and instruction often see a reduction in the number of students receiving interventions as a result of having strengthened the daily instruction learners receive. Indeed, when instruction meets the needs of all learners, we can anticipate a series of important long-term outcomes. Reduction in the number of students who need intervention. Reduction in the amount of money spent on interventions. Decreases in the number of students referred to special education. Thank you for joining us to learn about advanced literacies in curriculum and instruction. For more on this topic and the next generation P12 learning standards, please refer to a series of briefs posted for download from the New York State Education Department website. And additional resources for deeper study and learning can be found at the websites listed on the screen.